Great. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining today. We're lucky to have Lindsay Esther Grant. She's a pediatric occupational therapist, very knowledgeable in the whole space of childcare and setting up your spaces. I'm going to hand it off so you can start, sharing all your knowledge out. Thank you for joining.
Thanks so much, Benny. Thank you for having me. Yes, I'm a pediatric OT. It's been over 23 years that I've been doing this, always in education and primarily in early childhood. And we're going to talk today about strategies, sensory strategies specifically, to help deal with some of those challenging behaviors that you might come across in your environments and in your settings. Specifically, sort of behaviors tend to be more of the outward, come up more, like the aggressive, the screaming, kicking, throwing, those. But we're also going to talk a little bit about some of those shutdown behaviors too, because with sensory processing, sometimes you see that kids who avoid and don't really integrate with what you want them to participate in. And we're going to talk about their sensory reasons that could possibly be causing that, and then ways to support that to really kind of widen the breadth of bringing in all kids in your classroom to whatever wonderful activities that you've worked so hard and intentionally put out for them to learn from. Can everybody see my screen? Just want to make sure. Beautiful. All right. So really, when we're talking about sensory processing, we need to first figure out, what does that mean, right? We hear those terms all the time: sensory integration or sensory regulation. So just really quickly to kind of give you a background to what senses we're often referring to, it are sort of your 5 basic senses, although we talk a little bit about smell and taste a little less. The tactile system, your touch system, your auditory system, your visual system. And then there are some internal underlying more primitive systems that we often don't think about, but are very, very important for an ability for a child, especially, to regulate in an environment. And those underlying systems include our proprioceptive system, which is your muscle and joint system. It's sort of knowing, where is my body in space? How close am I to the person next to me? How heavy is something that I'm picking up? That's all that feedback you get from your muscles and joints when you're interacting with the world. And then that often is combined with what's called the vestibular system, and that is our movement-based system. And so we get feedback constantly as we're navigating physically through spaces. And what happens in preschool is pretty much that classroom environment, the settings that we're interacting with, actually all through adulthood as well, we're using almost all of those systems at the same time, or at least in combination of a few. And so that's the integrative piece, where we're going to talk a little bit today about some of those systems in isolation, but always keeping in mind that they kind of exist together. And we'll talk about what happens when you start becoming dysregulated in one system and then building upon that with another. And really, when you think about it, since this is kind of how we take in our whole world, it's going to really impact a child's ability to participate in many areas of school, the school day. Specifically for today, we're going to focus here on this behavioral system, but as you can see, there are all aspects, from motor coordination, engaging socially with your peers, maintaining attention, accessing playgrounds, and even the brain's ability to take information in and be in a state where they can learn. But since today kind of is a little more focused on behavioral challenges and what kinds of responses we can make, we're only going to really touch a little bit on this piece. But if I had more than 30 minutes, I could fill you in on a lot of other ways that, just by using even some of these strategies, you can really help make positive impacts with your children in a multitude of areas of their school day. So when we think about a classroom setting, and the ways we want to make it inviting for a child, and warm and kid friendly, right? We often think of, being very colorful and having lots of activities available, and, nice artwork on the walls and all sorts of things, kind of like we see in this picture. But if you look at something like this, you might notice maybe your first reaction possibly could be, ooh, there's a lot going on, right? That's a really busy corner of a classroom. And again, this is just a photo of one corner. You can tell it's a little bit of an old photo. We've got this beautiful TV from in ancient times. But what I want you to focus on is, does this environment make you feel a little bit more on alert, a little bit more overstimulated, versus if you were to look at a classroom environment more like this, do you have a change in your own kind of response where you might feel, oh, okay, that feels a lot more calm. It feels a lot almost brighter in a way, even though it's just as much lighting as the one next to it, but the lighting is not as much from overhead. There's some more natural lighting coming in. There's a lot more open space and a lot more visually accessible colors too that don't create so much overstimulation. I personally think both of these environments are very child friendly and they're very warm and they are cozy, but they impact our sensory system in a different way. And most of you, I might think, might say, I'd rather spend my day in the classroom on the right than the classroom on the left, unless it flipped on your screen, this classroom over here. So why is that? When we think about what happens when we get dysregulated, right? So if you go back to this slide of the first picture here, if I start getting overstimulated and dysregulated, I might think my environment's a little crazier. So my brain's starting to go a little faster. And then I start to spin out of control a little bit, right? I might get more dysregulated, feeling less calm. In our kids, what we see often, and the kids that kind of draw more of our attention as the educators, are these ones that increasingly lose control of their body. So you might see kids who start running around the room or rolling on the rug or, shouting and making loud noises, or they might be really silly and giggly, but not at the times you want them to be. They might get louder, right? Just overstimulation can increase the volume that kids start speaking in, where you might think, wow, they're really shouting and squeaking, when before they were talking at more of an indoor volume. A lot of times we try to use those words, right? Use an indoor voice. And what does that really mean to a child? It might go to even more extremes in some of these more challenging behaviors where things might get thrown, right? We might start throwing toys, breaking toys, slamming chairs. All those kinds of behaviors can really come out if a body starts getting dysregulated, or in another way, thinking about it as out of control of your body. That being said, I also want you to keep in mind these kids down here, because one challenging behavior that you might be having is not necessarily that the kids are wild and out of control, but that they're disengaged, that they are shutting down or isolated, or they refuse to participate in anything, right? So here you're trying to put out these wonderful provocations for them to interact with, but they don't go to any of those tables. Or when they're on the yard and you think, now's your chance to go play and get some energy out, they kind of wander the periphery or maybe stay closer to you as the adult. So think about those behaviors from both perspectives. It's not always the kids who are loud and wild that are dysregulated. Sometimes it goes the other way. So how does that happen in a classroom, right? How do we go where we might walk in and we're having a great day, or the parents say the kids were in such a great mood this morning. They were so happy to come to school this morning. I'm not sure why maybe this or that behavior happened. And what we're going to talk about, there are a multitude of reasons. There could be emotional reasons, social reasons. I wanted to play with that. Someone else has it, those kinds of things. But I implore you to also think about some environmental reasons that can really start to overstimulate the brain before you even interact with the child. So we talk a little bit about these bright primary colors, old lakeshore kind of colors that we used to think about. The classroom music, oftentimes we have music on that maybe to us seems very child friendly. It could be kids songs that are, the going on a bear hunt or the wheels on the bus or those kinds of things. And then we start talking on top of that, right? So we're in a bright room with music. We're talking and welcoming the kids. Maybe there's a lot of stuff out here where everybody can see, or the kids start coming in to more and more of the flow where maybe they're all on the rug. And now you have sort of, as you can see, one sensory system building on the other. And so every person has a threshold right? How much stimulation can you take in? And think of yourself. I always like to start as an educator with what can I take in? Right? Where's my threshold? Is it too loud? And that's where I feel myself getting a little agitated. Is it too bright? Are there too many people moving around me or bumping into me? And so then you start to think from the child's perspective, if they're becoming overstimulated, it could be any one of those things. And of course, if all of that's occurring at the same time, that might be enough to set them right over the edge, right? And that's kind of what's happening with a lot of these kids who then what you see is a behavior, right? Maybe an explosion or a meltdown. But oftentimes, as you know, most behaviors are a method of communication, right? They're not able to say, hey, this environment's pretty overstimulating to my visual system, but they're going to start acting out or shutting down. And that's where you want to go in as that detective and start to chase the why. And we're going to talk about today what you can do to make the environment more regulating, maybe for yourself or for a child, or make other types of changes in how you present activities throughout the day, or even how you set up different experiences, maybe during transitions and things like that, to try to keep as many kids regulated for as long as possible. Or if a child is starting to show you signs of dysregulation, now you'll feel a lot more comfortable of, oh, I see it. There, you know, that kind of feeling you've noticed with a kid where it looks like they're just about to go, they're just about to, you kind of see it in their eyes, right? So then you can start talking about some of the things you can do, either as a group or maybe with just a few kids, to start bringing that system down. Because the biggest mistake that we often make with sensory-based challenging behaviors, right? So a child is dysregulated. What we don't want to do is start pairing more sensory input on top of it, right? So a lot of times when a child becomes dysregulated, what we might do, when any person does, we say, oh, it's okay, take a deep breath, you know, calm down, it's all going to be fine. But all of that is just more sensory input, right? More auditory input. Maybe we put our hand on their shoulder, more tactile input. We're just flooding their system. So I want us to kind of think of how you as the teacher can make these positive behavioral shifts without necessarily even having to interact as much with the child, but it's more changing what's going on around the child, kind of a little more of that sort of UDL principle as well. So there are environmental strategies and the teacher strategies, and we're going to jump into these because this is what you guys are here for, right? You want tools and strategies. And this is just sort of the tip of the iceberg. I wish I had more than the 30 minutes with you to go into greater detail on what and how to do some of these things. When I work with schools, often I might come in and demonstrate a lot of these things as well, or work individually with teachers in their classrooms. But here's the general principles to take away from today. Consider how you've laid out and designed your classroom. And the way I like to think of it is the classroom is your home. It's that home for that group of children and yourself. And when you think about a home, usually, you know, it's not one big open wide space where everything is kind of going on in the center, but really we have these separate rooms that we do different activities in, right? In our home, we sleep in one room, we eat in one room, we might cook in a different room, those kinds of things. So when you're setting up the space in your classroom, one way to create a sense of calm and organization internally in a child is to create visually a sense of organization in the space. And you can do that. And I'm going to show you some pictures in a minute. You can really do that by using your furniture to your advantage, rather than putting all the furniture around the edges of the classroom and all your tables or play space in the middle. You can start to create and define boundaries using the furniture itself. And you don't even have to go out and buy new furniture. You can do this with a lot of things you probably already have in your classroom. And when you're thinking about also creating those rooms, it's really great to think of creating a space that I like to call a Zen zone. Some classrooms, I've heard them refer to it as a calming corner or a relaxation cave. And the idea is that you're designating a targeted spot in your room that children can go to if they want to try to sort of detox, if you will, if they're becoming dysregulated. So it's going to have a lot of calming, organizing tools in that space. The space itself won't have as much sensory stimuli. I'm going to show you a couple ways that you can do that in just a moment. And so that creates this safe spot that isn't timeout. It isn't, oh, your body's out of control, please go sit over there. Instead, you teach that as an area of learning and of calming to all students, where you can then say, it looks like your body's starting to feel out of control. Would it help you to spend some time in the Zen zone to help your body get more in a better state for learning, or to help your body be able to sit on the rug? And really promoting as this is a positive space, it can be so invaluable to a child who's dysregulated. Oftentimes as adults, we have the benefit where you say, you know what, I'm getting a little bit worked up. I'm going to go outside. I'm going to take a little walk. I'm going to take a deep breath, and then I can kind of collect myself and go back in. And it's the same concept, but a child isn't allowed to just go take a walk outside. So we're trying to create a space where they feel that sense of, I'm going to be okay, even if I become dysregulated, there's a place for me. And then we can help as the adult guide them, because they're still little brains there, and they're not going to be able to come up with all those answers on their own, but we can start pairing that language for them, which is another huge piece in behavior management, is that helping kids identify what they're feeling can be really helpful, so that it's not such a big, scary emotion. So if they're starting to feel dysregulated, I'm overwhelmed, these people are all too close to me, you might say, I can feel that your body's not comfortable right now. Let's go help find a place where it can be more comfortable. And that way they can start to build that language around how they're feeling, so that when they're older, late elementary, even in the middle school, they might start being able to recognize and even ask for proactively the things that help them learn best. So one of the other environmental things I really want you to think about is when you're setting up your walls, right? We often think, oh, the kids make such wonderful artwork, I'm going to paste it all up on the walls. I want to have all these beautiful bulletin boards, with the Eric Carle borders around them, with the Hungry Caterpillar maybe, and these, again, those sort of fallback of bright, cheerful, even kind of colors. Sometimes we use yellows and pinks and all those kinds of colors that we feel are very bright and cheerful, but they can be overstimulating. And also some things get lost, right? If you imagine your house and you just put up a bunch of different pictures all over your wall, you kind of don't know where to look, right? And so you either are looking everywhere, right? Those are those challenging behaviors of the kids that never seem to be focused on you. They're focused everywhere else. Or you might say, that's too much, I'm not going to look at the wall at all, And so thinking again of how you might respond in a busy environment, you might want to consider using more neutral colors, some emptier wall spaces, maybe even rotating art wall. That's something that I think is really beautiful in a classroom, where you're almost showcasing as an art exhibit for kids. So if you're working on a project and the kids' artwork is decorating, and then a couple months later, maybe there's some other beautiful project, instead of keep adding to your walls, maybe you take one down and replace it. And again, that novelty, one, sparks interest and can really, really set off some wonderful discussions as well, because the kids might notice, oh, that's different, right? We all are drawn to things that are different in our brains. So that's one wonderful byproduct of that as well. The other things to think about, like we talked about in those first pictures, things like lighting in your room. Do you have some natural light available to you? Or if you don't, and you only have a bright fluorescent-y kind of lights, you might consider ways to soften the light as it's coming down. And again, I'll show you some ways that you can do that in your classrooms. And then the last thing just to think about in terms of setting up your space is those pathways, right? And how does traffic flow? If you have a big open floor space, well, I'm a kid and I see a big open floor space, and that says to me, let's run around in it, right? So maybe this behavior is they're always running around or wrestling and tackling. If you start using furniture to guide flow of traffic, that can start to decrease that impetus for a child of, ooh, I want to fill up that space with my body. Instead, they realize, oh, that's a walkway. And so you don't even have to tell them as much. They're going to naturally respond that way. So that's something that you can also consider. And then always think about, we're going to talk more later, but using visual schedules and timers and other cues to manage behaviors as an alternative to always talking to the kids. Because when you're just using your voice, one, again, that can be more noise on top of maybe the music or the cars driving by outside, or it could be that the kids are having a hard time processing all that language, and by giving them something visual to look at, that can be really helpful. So this is what I was talking about, kind of putting that same room we saw a small piece of in the larger context. I want you to now see the whole space, where you notice they have warm, cozy centers, little spots in the room. Instead of one big, giant, bright rug, maybe smaller rugs that fit the space, a library here, or maybe it's a space for your calming corner there, and another rug that might be where you meet on the rug for your morning greeting. And then you can use bookcases and things like that to make walls. And doing that really helps visually for the child as well, get more organized, that I know where to be for that activity. And then the other thing that really helps a dysregulated child, if they're really having a hard time, maybe with transitions, that tends to be a time when a lot of behaviors come out, right? Those unstructured transition times. So we're going to move from the rug and we're going to go to the tables and do an activity, or maybe it's time to go get their snack to go outside. If you are just saying all those activities and they're trying to hold that in their heads, and now you excuse everyone and they all stand up, and maybe one child wasn't really able to follow along and they look at everyone standing up and they get up and now it's kind of crazy time. But if you have a visual schedule that's very clear of what order you're going to do things, that can also help deal with, okay, what's next, right? Oh, the teacher said I can look at the board. Oh, we must be going to circle time because we just finished this. And one thing I love when you make these vertical kind of schedules is you can even do it where it's laminated with on a Velcro. And as you finish an activity, you can have maybe a child that's chosen for that day or the week, however you do that in your room, but they can take it off. So it starts disappearing as the day goes on. And that really helps have kids sort of start to develop that sense of time and order and sequence. It can calm anxiety for kids that might be having a hard time separating from families. You know, when does my mom come back? Oh, she comes back after these 3 activities, that kind of thing. So it can help you talk through their day. And then it also can really help for kids who start to get a little bit dysregulated, not knowing where they're supposed to be. Instead of telling them, we might say, hey, let's go check the schedule and see where we're at. And then the last thing I want you to notice over here, I think that is so helpful for kids who are more visual, is taking real photos of your kids in those activities, which can be a fun project in and of itself. But that way, instead of having sort of those sort of clip art drawings, this way, this can really help anchor a child who is maybe getting dysregulated and where can I be, or I don't know what's going on. They recognize that playground, or they recognize themselves even in the photo of sitting at that table for snack time. That can really help keep kids organized and their behaviors a little bit more calm. So it's just something to think, if you don't do this already with your visual schedules, it's a really nice way to implement more structure and organization to your classroom without having to constantly be telling the child where they need to be. This is another example of sort of less is more. It's very clear, right, that there's building here. I see the blocks. You can see this is more of that neutral colors, not so bright. But you can have some pictures in this particular classroom. They put pictures up of different they were working on bridges and structures. And so that was sort of their theme. And so they had some pictures of some of those different kinds of structures. And then they used the space by using the back of the kitchen, right, to create this lovely workspace here for building. And the kitchen, which is also a noisy area of the classroom, is right next to it. That can help really keep kids regulated to know, okay, if I'm in the mood and feeling good being loud right now, or I'm really looking for this kind of big, loud, crashing building play, here's my space. Whereas at the opposite side of the classroom, maybe that's where your library is or your Zen zone is. And so again, you're now delineating areas to have kids be able to either make those choices for themselves, or if you see that they're struggling, then you can help guide them to an area that might feel better for their body. Flexible seating is another really great way to manage challenging behaviors. Oftentimes what I hear a lot as an OT is these kids just can't sit still, right? It's circle time and they are up and running around, or they're rolling in the rug, or they're falling over, or they get up and they come and they sit in front of me and I want them in a circle. And I think that there's been a lot of past expectations of, a good class of kids are all sitting in a circle, all sitting crisscross, the hands are in their lap, very quiet, their eyes are on me. But in reality, that's not how kids operate, especially at this age. Just as you might feel more comfortable sitting on a couch than in a chair and a desk all day, or maybe when you're doing your reading or any work, if you're doing that, you say, oh, I really love to be on my bed, or I really love to just sort of chill out on the floor and feel like I can stretch out or have more space. Kids feel the same way. All brains and bodies don't learn the same. And if you think about the behavior, right, they're disruptive to my circle. Really what you want to ask yourself is, can I look at this in a different way, right? Can I reframe my thinking of, why am I having circle time? Is it to bring our community together? Is it to teach them about days of the week, or teach them to read a story and then start maybe thinking about some comprehension questions, or whatever it might be? That's why you're doing it. So if a child can sit crisscross and keep their focus with you, awesome. But what about the child who can lay on their bellies and still keep their focus with you, or maybe up on their knees? All these kids are in different positions in this picture, but you notice if you really take a look at their focused vision, it's on what the teacher's trying to get them to learn. So sometimes it takes a mind shift of, is this actually a challenging behavior, or is it a behavior that is challenging to me as the educator, my perception of how it should be? And if you can embrace some more of these different flexible seating options, where there might be a beanbag chair in your room, or maybe when it's table work, they're sitting on the floor or standing up or on a wobble stool, or just plain old laying on their bellies on the rug. But if that is all it takes for them to be engaged with you, then you've done it, right? That's the key, really. It's not how they sit, it's, are they engaged? And so really taking in that consideration will really start to mitigate a lot of those challenging behaviors during some of those more structured teaching times. I mentioned, again, this idea of having a Zen zone, a quiet space. I wanted to show you what that could look like. This is a classroom that I've worked in where they did not have a lot of space. They said, it's a small square where we can't build this whole big quiet space. We have just a little corner. This is a doorway right here that goes out to the yard that is only accessed from that classroom. So when they're all indoors, nobody's coming through. And we just set up a little pillow with a couple of extra little nice pillows in a very sensory, calm area, right? Not a lot of pictures. And then there's a little toolbox here. And that's something that I want you to also think about. If you're trying to calm down in a moment, how often does someone saying, calm down, take a breath? How often does that calm you? Usually that's like, I am calm, right? I don't need a breath, you take a breath. So in a kid, it's the same. Instead, what if you give them some tool that helps their body regulate without you having to say any words to them at all? For instance, I can't really show you this here, but if I was in person, I'd show you these jars, right? The mindfulness jars. I don't know if you've seen them. They're like ocean jars where you shake them and then all the glitter might start to fall down. You can say to a child, why don't you go sit in the Zen zone for a little bit and shake up the jar. And I just want you to come back and tell me when all the glitter has fallen to the bottom. And during that time, while the child is now focused on that, their breath will start regulating and they will naturally start to calm down. You didn't have to tell them to do any of those things. You just gave them something else to focus on that will allow their body to have that time to come down and cool down. And then, like you had said, if they come to you at that point, they're probably already in a state where either A, if it's something where they might have hurt someone, you could then start that teachable moment of, okay, did you notice this, right? Because if you try to do that while they're dysregulated, they're not hearing you. So trying to get them into a state of regulation, then you can start some of that teaching. Or it's simply they're calm enough and feel regulated enough that they can just come join the group, sit on the carpet and go back to listening, whatever it might be that's happening at that time. But having these tools for them to help them calm, and them knowing that that's available to them, that in and of itself can start to temper down those behaviors, again, without you ever having to tell them what to do. And so it's really nice to have this space in your classroom as a space for regulation. Other activities, and again, this is a short list of many, but some big ones that you might want to try. Movement breaks. This comes more in you directing, right? And I recommend if you do it for your whole class as sort of a way to normalize. Maybe it's your morning greeting when we're about to wake up our bodies and we do some deep squeezes of our arms, or we're gonna do some chair push-ups. And I can't show you all these things through the screen, but often I can demonstrate some of those activities. And heavy work things, maybe they're doing animal walks, maybe you know that transitions are kind of hard. And so instead of just saying, okay, go everybody, it's free choice time, go find a space, you might have a few kids at a time say, I want you to crab walk over to that space, and you're going to bear walk to that space. Again, giving them purpose while giving them input that's calming to their bodies. A heavy work input is really, really calming and organizing. The more you can do with weight, the more you can do to sort of calm down the system. And the best weight for all of these kids, honestly, is their own weight against gravity. So what that means is if they have to crab walk, right, hold their belly up as they move across the room, gravity is weighing down on them a lot. And so just that in and of itself is going to start calming the system. It's that proprioceptive system we talked about, that muscle and joint system. Well, that system signals the brain to start producing more serotonin, which is our calming chemical. And so again, you can start calming and organizing a child by just having them do something else that will calm the body for them, which is really the ideal situation at this age, because talking them through it, they're not old enough yet. Other things that you can have either indoors or outdoors, some linear stuff, linear movement, where you're kind of rocking back and forth. Also, as we know, by having maybe if we were in a hammock or you're sat in a rocking chair, how that can be really soothing to the body. So if you have swings on your site, that could be something to encourage them to use, whether it's during outdoor time, or if they've become really dysregulated and they need a break, maybe that's where you take them. If the outside is really close to your classroom, maybe it's, hey, let's just go out and swing for a minute. Or maybe you have a rocking chair in your room, which could be a really nice area for them to go to. Other outdoor activities, hanging on bars, climbing up ladders or rock walls, pulling wagons. If you have those two-seater tricycles, it's really fun. This is also a nice social benefit where you have one child pedaling and the other kid is sitting on the back, so it's more weight to pull. So you're giving calming experiences to that child while working on some social interactions, or possibly even turn taking when they switch. So there's ways that you can do this with the tools that you already have, but it just might take a little encouragement for you, for those kids, that, hey, this might be something you want to try. Other fun ways to do it are during snack time. That sometimes gets to be a time where kids get really dysregulated, right? Because again, it's very unstructured in a lot of environments, right? One kid might not be a big eater, and so they're done, but other kids are eating and then they become really wild. So having some games that are involved around eating, or if it's not even eating itself, just games that might be you play right before eating. So blowing and sucking through straws is a really fun thing to do. So it could be something where you're trying to say, you know, you're drinking water and now you're trying to suck up yogurt, and all that extra muscle that they have to use here really can start working those proprioceptive systems here in their jaw, which actually, fun fact, it's our strongest joint in our body, which is kind of a really great tool for you to remember, because that's why kids bite. If that's one of your challenging behaviors, he gets upset, he's a biter. I hear that a lot too. Well, they're biting because that is the quickest way for them to get that input through their body, is to chomp down. Now, that could be what some people might say, oh, they're acting out, they're just bad. Or maybe they're communicating, right? He took my toy, I didn't like that. or he bumped me and I didn't like that either, and they go to bite, right? So if we can start giving ways to calm the system through other oral motor activities, they might not need to go to that stage because they're going to stay more regulated through things that might have previously gotten them a little more dysregulated. So you can do that through even chewy foods if you serve snack, bagels, dried fruit, all of those kinds of things. And then I'm going to end today, because I know it's a lot of information, but transitions, I brought it up a couple times already, but transitions, I'm sure you guys maybe are thinking that is the downfall to all behavior, right? They were sitting, they were engaged, everything was great, the class was calm. And then we're getting ready to line up or wash our hands, go get snack, and all of a sudden it becomes mayhem. This is where you want to use your tools. And there's a few ways to do it. On the whole, having that visual schedule that we talked about is going to really help support transitions because they know what to do. If you need to, for an individual child, you could take that same schedule, right? And you could make a smaller one where they can carry it with them, especially a child who might be showing more anxiety-based behaviors, right? They're worried about what comes next. The other thing you could do is if you have a 3-step activity, right? So maybe they're sitting there and you want them to, pick a piece of paper, get a paintbrush, and then paint a picture of the garden scene in front of them, whatever it might be. If they don't know what to do and they start then just like throwing paint and all those things that seems like it's chaos, maybe giving them a checklist with pictures in a sequential order of what you want them to do can help them orient themselves without you having to be there always telling them every step of the way. Visual timers are also great. Where you might say they have, this is something we do a lot as adults. We might say 5 more minutes, and then in a minute, we say time to clean up, right? And that concept of time is hard. If you use a visual timer, which is this back here, I'll just take you back 1 second to show you. This is an example right here. This one's called the time timer. There's many different kinds out there, and there are ones you can even use as apps. If you have a smart board in your room that you want to put it up there, they make those little time timers in large sizes. So you can have them in your classroom, but it might be a way also to help transitions where kids can gauge time. Because a lot of times the fighting back, pushing back behaviors might happen if a kid does not want to stop doing something, right? It's time to transition, but they're not done. That a lot of times you get a lot of pushback where they might scream or say no, or I'm not done. To help them through that, having a timer so they have an expectation. And then the other thing that's really nice with transitions is also giving them a concrete single step instruction. So what are they going to do when that timer goes off, right? When the timer goes off, you're going to take your paint and you're going to put it at the sink, or you're going to take your paper and you're going to put it on the drying rack, whatever it might be. Or when the timer goes off, I want you to put all these blocks back in this bin, so that you're giving them something more than just cleanup, right? Which is very abstract. Having transition objects is also a really nice thing to do, where it might be, can you take this to another teacher, maybe outside, if they're going outside and that's in the hallway where they get distracted, give them a job. And then the last thing I can tell you that's really nice, I like to put this here as just something, this kind of is more of a preventative for dysregulation, is designating a space for unfinished work. A lot of times kids get worried. They don't want to leave their work because they think someone's going to throw it away or someone else might take it. So if they want to keep working, but oh, but it's our time to go outside, you want to maybe have a space in the room, an unfinished work where they can kind of park their work and then they can come back to it later, because there's going to be free choice time after snack and you can go get it. And that's where it's going to be safe. That can really start to where we're talking about de-escalating before they hit threshold. So, ton of information in a very short period of time. Here's my contact information. If you have any questions about any of the things that I was talking about, or you want to know more about other ideas, maybe you've tried a few things and they're not really working and you want to know some other tools. I was only able to give you a few in this short time. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm happy to go over all of that. Or even if it would benefit you, I could maybe even come and present more on this information to you as well at your school. That's kind of what I like to do in person, which is lovely because then you kind of get that feel yourself for the sensory experience of a classroom. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. That was a wonderful presentation. Very, very, straightforward. I feel like very at peace here. My environment's very sensory, it's very peaceful, non-distracted. So I'm sure there's gonna be a lot of takeaways and a lot of people are gonna be, implementing what you talked about. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. And I'm sure you're more productive in a peaceful environment, as we all
Yeah,
are.
as we all are, exactly. I
sure.
will go ahead and let me stop this recording.